Hello everyone. So today we have an interesting topic. It is all about triggers. There are a lot of frameworks in market, and then there is always a struggle in deciding which framework is suitable in which condition and how to make a call. So this presentation is our sincere attempt to do some research, bring it forward with you, and I'm thankful to my colleague Prakash, who is leading a team here, who is building an amazing ISV product for our client, and he would like to take it forward from here. Hi Prakash, why don't you introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, Abhinav. As you mentioned, my name is Prakash Tiwari. I'm a lead Salesforce consultant at Concretio. And as we did a research for a ISP project to get a better framework as per our own context, what we needed, and based on that we have prepared a presentation so that we can like discuss with you as well what are the things we have considered before deciding picking a the framework for a trigger. So the title of
Perfect.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, the title of the presentation is as is of a trigger framework. So we have seen like we have a couple of trigger framework, and the trigger framework is evolving day by day. So here we'll discuss like how it's evolved and what are the features they have added and how the journey is started as well. So that all will cover in this presentation.
Perfect. This is a good, I think, backdrop for everyone who is looking to learn about triggers. So let's go ahead, Prakash.
Yeah, so let's jump to the agenda. What we are going to cover in this presentation. So, firstly, we'll discuss about the introduction. What is a framework? What is a trigger framework? And why we needed it. And then, secondly, we'll discuss about the changes, like the age of a trigger framework, how the the change made to the trigger framework over a time. So here we'll discuss detail how the early days developer doing a coding whenever they're supposed to write a code in a trigger. And at the end we'll discuss about the design scenario where we'll select the best open source trigger framework for our use case. So let's move to the first thing, which is the introduction. And discussing about before like going to discuss about a trigger framework, uh, first thing is that what is a framework? We often heard about the keyword in our daily use. There is a framework we have to utilize for other features and the functionality. So what is a framework? So framework is a highly optimized and reusable structure that serve as a building block, and these building blocks provide a common functionality and overridable as well. And as this common functionality we have in a like defined place, so it definitely increase the speed of a development and come with the clarity and the efficiency of a code as well. That also responsible to simplify the code review and debugging. So it means we have a common feature in a defined places, and if needed, we can extend the common functionality as per our use case, which is known as the framework. So I think we are clear on a framework. So let's go to the trigger framework. And before going to the trigger framework, as we all know about the Apex trigger, how we needed the Apex trigger in a Salesforce. So often we come with the complex business scenario which we cannot do via flow or any non-programmatic way. So we have to choose at Apex trigger framework. Sorry, Apex trigger, which is a more capable to perform the complex operations and do the such thing which we cannot do using the flow and process builder. So same feature like as we discuss frameworks, the framework capability is a like common feature we have on a defined places and we can override it. So the same feature we needed for the trigger framework is known as the Apex trigger framework. And what are the common functionality that trigger framework should have? So the like the common is scalable. So as we know, like whenever we are writing a trigger, the trigger should have the bulkify logic. So while we are defining any framework or developing any framework, that framework should be scalable to handle the bulk number of record. And other thing is traceable, like we can easily trace which logic is going to be executed and when. So it's become easy to debug the issues whenever we need to have to get more about or if we face any problem. So it's very clear to like where have to see the codes, where the code may have a wrong logic. So that's the feature. And then other thing is that reusable. So we often see in the apex trigger means we have the same logic in multiple places. So using a framework, we have to optimize our logics to be reused. Means we have to create a one generic things like where we'll put all the generic the method is, so that we can use for the multiple trigger as well as for the multiple actions as well. When I'm referring the actions means the multiple functionality on a same object. Means we may have to multiple logic on a same object. It could be like either we are like having a set of rule to like whether this field should have this kind of a value. Means we want to make the field required using a trigger. So that could be that thing. And other thing is that we want to perform a calculation based on the field, and that calculation supposed to be populated on some other field. So there could be multiple scenario, or maybe we want to send some email once the record is got submitted, or it's in the like active state. So we want to do some customization there. So there is like numbers of the processes which we want to execute when the record is going in a life cycle of a particular record. So that's the thing. And then atomic feature, what is the atomic is we want a feature to allow to bypass the specific trigger when we needed to bypass it. And at the last we have to consider is optimization. So whatever the framework we are going to build or going to be pick, the main and the I would say the important point is how much this trigger is optimized, because we all know how the governor limit is playing a role while we are writing any logic. So we have to make sure this trigger framework is not going to consume more SQL limit and more governor limit. And other thing is that the framework should capable to have a prevention technique for recursions. So these are all the capability we should at least have in the trigger framework. So I think I'm clear here about the trigger framework as well. Like what are the common feature we needed and that's supposed to be in the trigger framework. So let's go into like the trigger framework. So here what I did, I have categorized into three part of a trigger framework. So so that we can discuss about in detail what was the challenges and how the framework getting the change over a time. So there is the three thing, the first stage and second stage and third is. The first is simply the trigger. When in the early days Salesforce introduced a trigger, how developer writing logic at that time, and then how we come through the second age, the trigger handler, and the last we'll talk about the third is where we'll discuss about the framework driven approach. And Along with discussion, we'll discuss about the the advantage and disadvantage of the particular age as well. So yeah, let's go to the first stage of a trigger.
So, Prakash, here age you're calling as generations. Like initially we started with simple, then we got something else, and then something else.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay,
To simplify and to make it like by telling a story, we can talk about like how it is getting involved and what are the challenges we face, and we think about a solution, and then we implemented those changes into the framework. And again, like, so we can tell the story, and in that when it's easy to learn, and who's a new, like the new developer, they can also aware about how the framework evolved, right, from basic apex trigger to framework.
correct, correct. Fair enough. Please go ahead. Yeah, with the slides.
Yeah, so the first is, as we mentioned, the simple apex trigger, and we know like the how much apex trigger is capable, right, when we use in a correct way. So it simplify lots of things, but it's create a lot of headache when we implemented the apex trigger incorrectly. So the early days of a trigger were marked by simple single purpose trigger. Each trigger addressed specific requirement and offer leading to scattered and redundant code. So basically in this age we like uh, whenever there is any the business requirement we have, so we are creating a trigger. So for that particular specific requirement, the apex trigger is getting created over an object. And if somehow we come with a different requirement, then again we are creating a different apex trigger to write down the logic. And as the logic is written inside the trigger, so we are unable to reuse the logic if something we want to reuse. So means this is redundant code we have on multiple triggers on the same object. So the challenges for this is to difficult and maintain uh, difficult to maintain and update the code base as grow. And order of execution, as we know, like the Salesforce isn't defined, is not have any configuration to define the order of execution for triggers. If we have a multiple trigger on a particular object, there is no mechanism to define the order of execution. The second problem is logic often is scattered and leading to inconsistency. So as I already explained, like we have a same logic maybe in a multiple trigger and unable to deactivate in the production. So this is also the challenging thing. Like if we have written a logic in a apex trigger, so the apex trigger we cannot like deactivate in the production. So this is also the very biggest challenge for these kind of trigger approach, where we are simply writing a logic in the trigger. Okay, so let's move to the another age, which is the second age. And here we'll see how the trigger handler are getting in used and what are the problem handler is going to solve. So developer begin separating the trigger logic into the handler classes to follow the principle of a separation of concern. Trigger event before insert after update were delegated to the method within the handler class. So as I mentioned, like in the first stage, what are the issue, like let's suppose I have any the generic method and it's written inside the or a generic logic which is written in the apex trigger. The second apex trigger cannot use the same logic, they also need to write down the same logic. So it's a repetitive code. To solve these kind of a problem, we in this age come with the handler approach. So what the deciding factor is the separation of concern. We have to define the the place where we can write the logic and how we can reuse. So instead of writing a logic in a apex trigger, in this age, developer create handler, and in the handler all the business logic is written. So if you see let's uh, see the diagram as well. Like we have a s object, and on s object we'll have a trigger, and that particular trigger is basically calling a handler method, and the handler method is responsible to have a multiple methods which are doing the business logic. So if we needed a common functionality, so we could create a generic method and we can use that generic method in a business logic 1 and business logic 2 as well. So we don't need to write down the repetitive code. And other thing is that the we we can, like, the follow the best practices of the apex trigger, like one trigger per object paradigm, so that we can also like follow using the trigger handler approach. So let's see via code as well. So let me open VS Code and explain how the actually code were written in code is written by following the handler. For example, I have created a apex trigger on an account object for the following events. And here what we are doing, we are initiating a handler class which is going to perform a business logic based on the particular event. So like let's suppose here we have a insert and the before. So on before insert we are going to call this method of a trigger handler, and it will perform all the logic. Same way for the after insert and update. And now let's see the handler classes. So base okay. So here we have a handler classes. So in the handler classes, we'll have all the method defined before insert, before insert, before update, and after insert and after update. And these method is going to define, here we can create a generic method which we can reuse multiple times. And as well as what we can do here, we can define the order of execution as well. Like let's suppose there is a scenario where I need to call the business logic A first, and then the business logic B. So I can define in the code here the call method 1 and then method B. So here I can control that execution as well. But yeah, it's controlled within a Apex as well. So this is a simple example of a handler, and may as we talked about the generic logic, let's suppose we have a generic logic, so we could create a helper class as well, and the helper class could have a generic logic as well, and we can reuse the logic uh, whenever we need it. Okay, so this is all about the Apex trigger in handler age. So let's move to the next slide, which is the advantage. What are the advantage? As I already talked about it, like the now the logic is within the Apex class. So if it is within an Apex class, we'll easily able to uh, reuse the logic, as well as we can easy to unit test that logic as well. It's much easier to do. Allow code to be called from other code or test. Use a specified trigger context and the trigger variable for the routing, as we already seen in the code, like the before insert and before update, how we use and call the different method at a different time. Keep trigger simple. Yeah, so if you see in the trigger, we are not having any kind of a business logic here. We just have a context variable, and using that we are defining the routing of our methods. So this is what we can achieve using a trigger handler. Let's go to the limitation as well, as it's not 100% capable. So what are the limitation we have in the handler? So as you uh, let me go to the apex trigger as well. So here we can see we have a such logic, right? We are having a handler, and to call the handler method we have a context variable. Based on the context variable we are calling the particular method. So these kind of a code will be repetitive in all the apex triggers. So this is what we are talking. Still we have a duplicate code in the trigger. For each trigger we have to write down the those routing logic. So the question is how we can simplify that thing. And the order of execution control in apex only. So and inconsistency implementation across the project. So means we here we can see we have used the handler, but we haven't any set of rule to create a logic and to use a generic classes. Okay, so in the different project we see the inconsistency for the handler approach as well. So yeah, this is all about the handler age. Let's move to the third age, which is a framework driven approach. So in this one, we try to solve the all the limitation what we have in the handler. So the first problem was like order of execution, which is control, but control within a apex only. So first thing is that the challenging part, and at least have these capability what we defined in the earlier slide: the scalable, traceable, reusable, and atomic and optimized. Along with this feature, what feature is good to have in the framework is that easy to customize by both the label, object and action. So as I mentioned earlier, we can we will have a multiples, the business logic on a object. So we want the capability so that we can customize the trigger on an action label as well as on an object label. Maybe I want to disable the trigger on a from all the actions, so I can do from the object label. And let's suppose I want to disable one particular action, so I can like make it via action label as well. And then this is a dynamic enabling and disabling. So let's suppose we have a the business requirement where we want this particular business logic run only if user is having set of this label, or having a this set of permission. So that we can also able to decide on a runtime. And nowadays the Salesforce flow is also very famous to do all the things whatever is the limited. So if the logic is written in the flow, so how we can call the flow as well. So like to call the lightning flow in a order of execution, how the framework can help to do in that way. And other thing is that consume less governor limit to get a configuration. So this is the main the feature which is going to be play an important role to pick a framework.
Right. So, Prakash, here if we try to see like the previous generation or previous age, which is handler, it is mostly Boolean, like it will be enabled for the full object or it will be gone in full. And then here, if you talk about actions, so actions are something like individual, you can say use cases, right? For account object itself, like you have, let's say, seven triggers, different triggers, or different use cases is a better terms, because we now write a single trigger. So action is that thing, right? If we correctly try
Correct.
to scope it.
Yeah, correct. So yeah, action is that's the thing only. Like on object, we have a multiple business requirements, so we could create a like own logic for that particular business, and we can order in that particular object as well.
Okay, and we can order between actions. And another thing which is interesting is enabling, disabling for a specific user. That part
Correct.
means like we are uploading data, like data uploads, or some other use cases where you would like to disable maybe some bugs.
That's correct. Yeah, this is that feature only. Like so. there is a two way to do this thing, enabling and disabling. One is via configuration. We can go to the object level configuration and deselect that for the whole object, or maybe at an action level we can navigate to the action level of a configuration and we can disable it. This is a static enabling and disabling. For the dynamic, let's suppose I have a user which is assigned with this custom permission, then only I want to run this specific logic. So here I'm like the configuration will be same, but it will act like the logic will be executed for a specific set of user only, which is having those custom permissions. So this is kind of a that feature, and we'll talk about it, and I'll show you how we can configure in the the open source trigger framework as well.
Perfect, perfect. Yeah, so let's keep rolling.
Yeah, so this is all the definition which we have covered. So let's jump to the code to see how the framework uh, we can utilize. So basically, in this is what we have to do. We have the trigger, Apex trigger is uh, getting more simplified. So now we have to create a trigger, and in the trigger, what we need to do, we need to call a particular method, and it would be same for all the trigger where we want to create on particular object. This is going to be the same structure. So metadata trigger handler and then run, and all other logic will be inside the trigger framework only. So, and what I have to do, I have to do create a handler class. So basically in the handler class, if I want to write a logic for a particular event, like let's suppose for the before insert, so here I just need to implement that interface of a before insert which is provided by the framework, and we can simply start writing our logic without thinking about any context variable or any routing. And the context code or the calling this particular handler is going to be taken care by the framework itself. We only need to focus on our own logic which supposed to be right within this method. Same with the before update. So what I have to do, I have to implement another frame, another interface and the method, and this will be called by the framework in order of execution how we define. So this is how they simplify writing a code while we are using trigger framework. So let's go to the slide and see our contest. So as I already mentioned about the design scenario, and here we'll have our own contest where what are the requirement we have, and based on the requirement we are going to discuss about few open source trigger framework, and then we'll select which one is fit for our requirement. The first requirement is, as we all know about the framework, so we know about the best practices as well. So we'll go with the core design requirement that framework must follow the one trigger per object paradigm. So, and so what it means, like if I have created a apex trigger, and as I already showed this thing key, we have a trigger, and here I'm just calling the handler. Again, if I need to write down any logic and after delete, so I don't need to create a trigger. What I have to do, I have to create a handler, and that handler should implement that the before delete or the after delete interface and our logic. This is how we can like prevent creating a multiple trigger per object. So it should follow the one trigger per object paradigm, and framework must support the loose coupling between the triggers and handler classes, so these don't need to coexist in the same package. So means like as we seen, like the framework code isn't here, so we have our own like handler classes. Sorry, not this one. Yeah, this one. Here we have our own business logic for the handler, and I don't need to care about what is written in the framework. So the framework can be have in the different folder, and our handler classes could be in a different, so there will not be any dependency, so that we can deploy the code very easily. And trigger handler features requirement. So as we know here, in terms of the technical, it is a trigger action, but in terms of a business, it called the business logic or the action logic. So we could have a multiple, the actions to be performed on a particular object on a specific event. So what are the feature we required for the handler? The trigger handler method must run in a defined sequence. Maybe I have a multiple scenario which I want to execute. So I am able to, like, the configure the order of execution, and this framework must follow that order of execution and run logic accordingly. And it should straightforward to support the trigger handler invocation for a data load. So basically, it supports straightforward to suppress the trigger handler invocation for the data load. Let's suppose I want to do the data loading, and at that time I don't want to execute my Apex trigger, or maybe the actions which is sending an email and all. So I don't want to do for the data load. So I can go and easily configure this feature. We need it in the, the configuration side. It should be possible to identify the trigger recursion and prevent a trigger processing more than a specified number of times. So as we know, it was the like required. The trigger should have the capability to prevent a recursion. And as we know, like how depth trigger, apex trigger could run. So we can define the number of execution, like how many time we want to, like, the logic to be executed, and after that we can like prevent to executing the logic. And what could be the non-functional requirement is performance impact should be minimum. The framework itself should be lightweighted to reduce to build a scratch. Means we don't want to have a heavy weighted code, so that it could take a lot of time to deploy. And as this is a brand new ISP development uh, thing, so we are going with the, the SFDX development approach, where we are creating a scratch very often. So we don't want to like have the weighted framework that will take lots of time for the deployment. The framework should be established and proven to be scale. Yeah, that is the most important thing as a non-functional requirement. The trigger should be established. We don't have multiple bug, or we don't have any bug in the framework, or it support, the future scale as well, like if the framework is getting uh, improved. So yeah, let's come to the uh, s- discussion of available open source trigger framework. Before that, here we are clear, right, with the requirement, or do I need to explain anything in this point?
No, I think this was good, Prakash, and I think I would try to come back on the scalable, stable point of view. But I think this is good overview.
Okay, so let me open the open source. So here I means we have covered couple of framework which is available in the open source market, and it's all free. You can utilize whatever is suitable for your use case. So this particular use case, we are going to have a brand new project where we want to select a framework based on the discussed the feature. The first is, let me explain quickly all the framework. First one is the message spanner, which is known as the trigger action framework. And the second one is the table driven trigger management, which is come along with the npsp package. And the another one is as object domain, which is come with the, the fwlib library. And we have a kevin's open source, where we have the simple and low code framework. And the last one is the rf live, the repo which is providing the open source framework. So let's discuss the first and most important thing is that the manageable by metadata. So as we talked about all the configuration where we want to define the order of execution, or where we can define like what are the set of custom permission which we needed to run the specific logic on a action level as well as on the object level. How we gonna configure it? Where the configuration will be stored? That is the part. And I just wanted to have a like little bit more discuss. I just wanted to discuss more about the metadata. Why we opted this point? Why not others? So the metadata is, the custom metadata is having a capability. So if we can configure within a sandbox, so it can be deployable to the production as well. So it's having a deployment feature. And the other feature is that like for the custom metadata, if we want to get a configuration inside the the logic via SOQL, which is also not going to be count against the governor limit of SOQL. So this is the main feature. That's why we want to see like which framework is using the metadata configuration. So Mrs. Spano is doing TDTM is not using the metadata, it's using the custom object to store the configuration. And the S object domain is as well doing the same thing. Kevin is not having that feature, and the RFLib framework is having that feature. It is like supporting the metadata to have a configuration. And then we have a complexity of a framework and footprint in a code base. So Mrs. Spanner is high. We have a multiple classes which is defined in the framework to do the specific task. Same with the TDTM is having the multiple classes, and as object is as well. The Kevin one is not having, the multiple Apex classes to have a logic. It's straightforward, have a one handler, uh, having a one class which is doing all the things. And RFLib is also high. There we have a multiple Apex classes which is doing all the things. Able to set the order of execution. We talked a lot about it key, how we can like set the order of execution if we have a multiples action on a specific object. So Mrs. Banner is doing, TDTM is doing, and FFlib is also doing that feature. Kevin Win uh, is not having, but it can, the do as I defined in the handler class, we can do via Apex class. So same way the Kevin is doing to do the order of execution, but as such no having any configuration to do that. But RFLib is having all the configuration to do the things. Add multiple handler and wire them in a metadata. Yeah, so if we have a multiple scenario, so we could create a multiple, the metadata to have a specific action. So Mrs. Spano is having, TDTM is not having, and FFLib is also not, Kevin is also not. RSplif is having that capability to configure on the action level. And then we have a disable the whole trigger from execution for all handled or for a whole object, so that we can do like in the message spanner as well as in the TDTM. And yeah, as object means FFlip is also able to do that, but this feature we are not having in the Kevin one. And same the RFlip is having that capability to disable the all the the handler for a particular object. Disable the trigger execution for a particular event. Like let's suppose I want to disable whatever the logic I have written in the before insert. So if this is a criteria and we want to like see which framework is providing that, so Mrs. Spanner is providing, and TTTM is also providing that feature. FFlib is not having that capability. Kevin Kevin one is a pretty straightforward. It's not having any configuration, so it's no. For RF leave, we have the same capability as Mrs. Pano is having. Now let's discuss about this one. This is more interesting. So disable the trigger execution of a handler via code. So let's suppose we have a handler X and ask for a disabling the execution of handler uh, for a trigger handler Y. So let's suppose I want to, let's take an example of account and contact. Okay, so maybe we have a trigger on both the object, and now when I am inserting the contact, I don't want to execute the account trigger, although I am doing a database operation on account list as well, but I don't want to execute the uh, handler of accounts, so that I can disable via code as well. So this feature is in the message panel as well as in the TDTM and no in the FFlib, and Kevin is also supporting that feature, and RFlib is also. So here we have Kevin and RFlib, and trigger action framework is supporting that. And the recursion control, we have this feature as well in the Mitch Spanner project uh, framework, and same in the TDTM, and RFlib is not having that feature. Kevin one is having that feature, and same with the RFlib is RFlib. The framework is having the same similar feature as we have in the trigger action. Ability to disable trigger for selected user only when like loading a data, or disable for the data load user only. So let's suppose I have created a one user which is doing a data loading, and I want to like, the bypass all the triggers actions for that particular user. So that we can do via this framework using a custom permission. This is doable in the TDTM as well, and FFLib is not supporting, and the Kevin framework is also not supporting. But in the RFlib, we can like have the same feature as we have in the trigger action. So yeah, as we discussed about the unit test, if the logic written in the Apex class, we can easily write down the the unit testing for that. So it's I think all the framework is supporting that feature except which one it's, yeah, the Kevin one is not supporting that feature. Apart from this, all the trigger is supporting that feature. And then let's come to the support for a flow. So now we know like how often we are writing the logic inside the Apex trigger, and how easy to write down the logic in the Apex trigger. So via auto launch flow, we can call Salesforce flow as well from the framework, and the criteria should be that the the lightning flow should be auto launch only, that we can call from the framework. And other than action framework, no one is supporting that feature. So trigger action is supporting that feature as well. We can like have a lightning flow as well in the order of execution. Avoid repetitive query. So yeah, Mrs. Pano framework is having a singleton pattern. While using a singleton pattern, it's giving a facility to have a query on a one place, and we can use or reuse the result of a query in all other actions. So this is supported by the uh, you know trigger action, but not in the TDTM, not in the FFlib, and not in the RFlib as well. So these are all the deciding factor which we have discussed and we have analyzed, and based on that we come on a conclusion. So if we going with the brand new ISP product development, where we need to select a particular framework for our development, we could, as we see, like we have a lots of feature in the Apex trigger framework, action trigger framework. So I think if your org is your product is a new, and this is the first framework you are going to opt, so it would be recommended that you can use the Apex, the trigger action framework. And we'll discuss more about the framework. I'll show you the repo as well. So this is recommended in that way because it's come with the lots of feature. We have a control on the action label as well as on the object label, and it do have a custom, the metadata for a configuration, which is consume less governor limit to get a configuration. as well as it's having a feature of deployment. So if it's configured in the sandbox, you can deploy easily in the production as well. You don't need to do anything else about it. But the same way, if your org is already have a npsp or the eda package, which is a very famous package for the Salesforce development. If you already have those packages, so you just need to explore this, the framework which is provided by the Salesforce and how you can configure it. So this is recommended when you already have an NPSP package, so you don't need to use another framework and all. You could use the same framework which is provided by the Salesforce. You can use, and this framework is also the best part about the framework is this is using the cache capability to store to get a configuration. So if the npsp or the eda package is installed in your environment, you could use this framework. And the ff one is like if you are going to have a multiple things to do, like you want the framework for a DML operations, you want a framework for the query framework, you want a framework for the SOQL as well. So you can go with this FFlib one as well. Here you will get multiple framework for the selector as well as for a DML is called as unit of work. So you can choose this one and you can scale up your or design your trigger in that
Right.
way.
I think Prakash, this one is actually a combination of frameworks. You can pick so many things out, and then it. I don't know what's the right way to put it correctly, but it's a set of architectural practices which come all together in one shot instead of just trigger framework.
Correct, yeah. So it's the collection of a framework that we can say that.
Right. But in any case,
And
do you
if
suggest this for ISVs? Like, in what condition, like, probably we should leave mid spano? Because this is heavy, which I believe, this trigger action, not trigger action, this FFlib.
yeah, so as been like if you have a requirement, like you want a multiple framework for the multiple operations as mentioned here, like if you want a framework for the unit of work, you want a framework for the SQLs and other thing as well, but you're not you are not going to fully focus on you don't needed a control on a action, or you don't want to call the lightning flow from the trigger. If that's kind of a ISP is there, they basically want a framework to do the operations. They are not going to fully dependent on the apex trigger, means the trigger they want to use but not as much as detail as the action is providing. So in such a case you can opt this framework as well. If you not like needed a action level control, or you don't want to skip the things in a dynamic way, so you can opt this framework. And the other one is the lightweighted. Let's suppose your this one is the Kevin one, yeah. So this framework is a very lightweighted, I would say. There is a only one virtual class which is doing all the
Mhm.
things. So if you are ISP or the project development requirement is that like you want a handler, you want a framework, but it could be very lightweighted. I don't want to do the lots of thing it with it. So yeah, it's very the suggestion for it's very highly recommended to opt this one. And basically it would recommend it for the the service project, not for the ISP. But if you want to like do the service project and there you want your own framework, so it could be one class framework which you could opt and write down, and will get all the basics feature whatever is asked from the framework. So this is for the lightweighted project basically. And the last one is the RFlib. RFlib is mostly same as we have the Apex trigger frame, the action trigger framework. But the deciding factor is the support of support for the lightning flow. If you want to like call a lightning flow in order of execution, if this is your first primary, so you could go with the action one. Otherwise you can like it's a 50-50 to decide between rflib and the apex trigger framework, sorry, action trigger framework. So this is all about the conclusion and the comparison. And as I have mentioned about, we'll see the how it will look like. So here I have opened the apex trigger framework repo. Here you could see like if you want to have a trigger for opportunity. So here first metadata you need to create for the object label, and the object label we have a kind of the feature that we can configure required permission, bypass permission, and bypass execution checkbox. If you mark it true, the whole action will be bypassed for that object. Same with the bypass permissions. Let's suppose required permission. So here I can define one of the custom permission API name. If that custom permission is assigned to that user, then only all the logic will run. And same for the bypass permission. If it is assigned to the particular user, it will bypass all the execution. Other than that, it will run for every user. And the same way, here you can see the action is defined on a before update event, and here we can define the order of execution. So first thing is that ensure the stage name transition are valid, and then performing the another actions to do the things, and the other one as well. And for the different event, let's suppose you want to configure some different handler or action for the, so here you could define after update, and then you just need to define your the metadata record and define the order of execution as well. So this is how simple to have configurations for the object level. And as we discuss about the trigger, how we need to write down the trigger, and this is the action which we already uh, so so yeah, this is all about the discussion which we have on the trigger framework.
Perfect. So,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you, Prakash. Again, I would like to just reiterate that there are a lot of new trigger action frameworks, and this presentation is already nearing 1 hour. We cannot cover everything in one shot. We'll probably come again. We'll try to share more findings. And if you think we can cover something else which we missed in this one, drop a comment on the video. If you want to discuss anything further, again, drop a comment. Happy to take it back to Prakash and our technical team and get back to you. And again, thanks a lot, Prakash, for the research and presentation. And thanks for everyone who is watching out there. Thank you.
Thank you.